It's your friendly timekeeper here telling you that it's time to start the conference. Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome back. I hope you had a good evening at the National Museum last night. Who managed to make it there? Oh, that's not bad. Oh, who managed to make it back? Good one. So yesterday, we spent a good part of the day talking about sector focuses, regional issues, toolkits on due diligence, impact assessment, fundraising, and finding talent. So it seems fitting that we should draw a line through all of that and go through all those topics and start today's program by talking about government engagement. So this morning's interactive panel, as you can see, our very proactive panel has already come up, will be moderated by Benedict Cheong, CEO of Temasek Foundation. And we will have Bruce Dewar, CEO of Life Philanthropy Partners, Kim Simon, Managing Partner of New Profit, Andrew Moorhead, CEO of Inspiring Scotland, and Paul Carter, Senior Partner at the Bridgespan Group. Thank you.
Testing. Okay. Looks like we lost some people to the bar last night. Or perhaps, does the casino open this morning? I mean, I'm not sure. Okay. In a true Asian tradition, I shall start with an apology. And the apology is this. I myself don't have much experience in venture philanthropy. And so I apologize if my comments appear to be off track during this panel. But I think that's why Doug and Simon chose me to be the moderator, because I don't know anything about this topic. And because we have four very experienced panelists, so I just get on to them quickly so that I talk less and they talk more. So we start with Bruce, right? Bruce, as you share about what you do, perhaps you can also share about why the Canadian government looked at things differently 12 years ago and created what is now LIV Philanthropy Partners.
Sure. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to congratulate AVPN on this conference and a great turnout. And it was funny yesterday when Paul put the slide up of the dinosaurs. You know, I think we have quite a few dinosaurs on the stage now. And
speak for yourself. Okay.
I think, except here. And so we've decided that, we're really going to try and keep our comments as short as possible and really open up for questions. So, the Canadian government got involved for a couple of reasons. And it's interesting, governments get engaged for usually two reasons. One is they don't like the status quo and they feel they need to do something different, and there's an opportunity to do that, or there's a crisis. And we're all aware of the financial crisis that's happening to Western governments right now with less dollars. And so what happened, my organization, LIV Philanthropy Partners, is based in Vancouver, and we hosted the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2010. And our government realized that they could drive social change off hosting these games, not just put on a sporting event. And so they made a strategic decision to invest in an organization to disrupt the marketplace a bit, to do things differently, to bring an entrepreneurial spirit to the sector, to make sure there was measurement in place and accountability, and to do things a little bit differently. And so they invested in our organization back in those 2010 legacies now, and we had 10 years of driving social change off of games. And from that work, the IOC identified we were a best practice in doing change off of games, not just putting on a sporting event. So we did work with inner city youth, we did work with Aboriginals, we did work on literacy, skills development, a variety of different areas to really drive change. And that didn't just happen because the government decided. We did a lot of work with them on the policy side to make sure they made the right decision. So sitting down with deputy ministers, assistant ministers, political staff, and finally the politicians to make sure they understood what this could be. But at the same time, we were engaging the community that was the right thing for the community. It wasn't just going to be put onto the community. And as we came out of, or we were going into the games, we realized our model could transition into venture philanthropy. We had been doing some of that in our work already, and we were getting good traction on that kind of work. And so we started influencing, again, the policymakers to make sure they were going to embrace this model, understand what it was. And coming out of the games, they made an investment in us to really look at engaging the sector a little bit differently and to look for what social innovation means and solutions in their communities. And recently, the federal government, as of Monday, released a report talking about social finance and social innovation, and we're one of the groups they want to work with, and venture philanthropy is in there in a different way. If we weren't part of that discussion and really influencing at all levels, venture philanthropy, I think, would be on the sideline. So government is looking for new solutions, they're looking for better solutions, and they need partners or intermediaries to help deliver differently. And the big key they like about venture philanthropy in Canada is measurement, accountability, and really selecting those that can really do amazing work, not just flittering the dollars away by giving money to everyone. So those are my comments.
Thank you. So, can I paraphrase that you like government?
I wouldn't go that far, and there's no one here from the Canadian government. Working with government is a challenge. It's not easy. You heard yesterday about working with investors. It's a different language. There's a gap. There's a big gap between government as well. And I think you have to spend as much time to understand government as you do other investors. And you have to treat them like an investor and figure out what their challenges are. They're very risk averse. They managed based on protecting themselves and what would be in the public. So again, I wouldn't say I love government, but they've been a great partner to us, especially on the public policy.
All I wanted was a yes or no. It's okay. Thank you. See, non-committal, but that's okay. Kim, as you share about your organization, can you also share what the critical roles that venture philanthropy can play, no matter how healthy government budgets and national economies are?
First, I should say thank you too. It's been just an incredible privilege to meet so many of you and see the quality of the conversation here in Asia after not so many years. I actually am a dinosaur. I've been doing this work for about 15 years, which for venture philanthropy is pretty dinosaur-like. So it's just remarkable to see what's happened in just a handful of years here. Congratulations. So New Profit was one of the early venture philanthropy models in the US, and it was really started by social entrepreneurs, people who had direct experience working inside an organization that was driving results in the social sector and having the direct experience of having funders say, you're so successful, you're doing great, you must not need our money anymore. We're going to go give our money to those guys over there who are struggling and collapsing. And we just had this repeated experience, several of us who got involved with starting New Profit, of the profound disconnect between how resources are allocated and where results are coming from. And that really was what motivated us to start. So we've been at it for 15 years. We have about 38 investments. We are chartered in a way that lets us do for-profit and nonprofit commitments, although we only have done nonprofit until very, very recently. We're just beginning to get our feet wet in a for-profit space. We're headquartered in Boston, working all across the US, and have about 50 people on our team, some of whom are here. I hope you all have had a chance to meet them. What we are focused on is really any lever that we can identify towards social or economic mobility. And the model has evolved tremendously over time, but I'll spare the details of that, except to say that where we are today is where the conversation has started for many of you. So it's really great to see you not going back and reinventing all of the wheels that we did. I would say that venture philanthropy can play a critical role in relation to government in probably 5 ways, and I'll touch on them very briefly. Really what we are about is finding the most effective ways to solve social problems. And to the extent that the government cares about an effective use of resources, venture philanthropy can become a vehicle and a partner for doing that. So philanthropy can be much closer to communities, better positioned to understand the challenges that a community faces, as well as sort out which solutions might have the most relevance. Venture philanthropy can do deep due diligence on potential investments in a way that government can't, and also is presumably free from a lot of the political challenges that go into decision making. So the political pressure about equal distribution of resources or political favoritism is absent for venture philanthropy. The second way is that venture philanthropists are positioned to help organizations strengthen and grow their impact in ways that government can't. whether that's direct involvement in portfolio management or sitting on boards of directors or getting really involved with helping to build leadership teams. That clearly that's not something government could ever do. Mobilize capital, that's a huge one for us. So government can create incentives, but government can't go around co-fundraising for organizations on the ground. It's something that many venture philanthropies are able to do, whether it's direct help with creating matches or aggregating capital around particular investments. And then the last piece connects to a theme that I hope we get to come back to, and that is that venture philanthropy can be the outside partner advocating for government policy that drives social innovation and social entrepreneurship. So one thing that New Profit got involved with, which was quite unusual at the start, was really building a policy effort to create social innovation policy, and we'll talk more about that later.
Thank you. This panel is not going the way I expected. They're all saying too many nice things about government here, so we'll move on and see whether our Scottish friend. You know, I love Scotland and I love Scottish people because the manager of the football club I support is Scottish and was Scottish. And I mean, besides the fact that you've just come from the bar, Andrew, perhaps you can share with us about what you do, and also should government aid programs and government-funded development agencies be rushing to adopt the impact investment model with their funds, or is this just a role for private sector capital?
Thank you. I've got two pieces of equipment to operate, so
It's difficult for Scottish people, right? I mean,
thank you very much for that kind introduction, and there's absolutely no truth in the bar story, but anyway, that's a Scottish stereotype that I don't fill. I would echo the previous comments on thank you very much for inviting me here, and I just find this whole thing incredible. The way that the AVPN has grown and the energy that's in this room and the talent that's in this room is quite staggering, so thank you for the opportunity. I thought it'd be useful to give a brief context of Inspiring Scotland. I previously ran a corporate foundation, and in 2005 started to find out about venture philanthropy and saw that as a possible answer to some of the challenges that foundation considered. The first challenge was the way in which money around so many of the social ventures that we saw in Scotland was very short term. Also, second challenge was the way in which money often is fragmented. And the third aspect that I thought we could address through the creation of a venture philanthropy answer in Scotland was a place to collaborate. So in 2006, I took a year out to go and research for answers and look at models. And I was very fortunate to spend a fair amount of that time in Australia. I see Gina in the audience there, who was a great mentor in that time, and Michael Trail, who was on the panel yesterday. But also, I took the opportunity to spend a couple of months in different parts of Asia. And I often, when I speak about that time, ascribe the word inspiring in our title to some of the stuff that I saw in this continent. So I came back from those travels, developed a model. I won't go into the model, but it was launched in 2008. And the slide you see there is just a quick context of where we are. I think we're moving in other directions towards perhaps a more blended thing, but for now we're a grant funder with a venture philanthropy angle. So here to talk about government particularly, but the important thing that I would stress about the model that we have is that it's a three-sector approach. And that being the government sector, private sector, and voluntary sector. Really the theory being that unless all sectors are on the same page, you don't make the best possible answers out of it. And why government? As I travelled around the world and spoke to very many philanthropists and philanthropic organisations, I found a huge dissatisfaction with government not becoming a partner in their activity, and too many car crashes of where people would rush at solutions and then try to bring government in as a partner late. So I saw it very important to bring government in early as a partner to what we were doing. And the second element was that of the ventures we were looking at potentially supporting, government was a key exit answer for many of those. So it was very sensible to bring them in early. A couple of words of caution, though, in my story were that there's very deeply polarized views wherever you go in the world about government engagement. I'm sorry, Benedict, but I'm a lover of government, but I had to overcome quite a number of views that weren't in that place to create Inspiring Scotland. So it's a tough process, and I think I stretched a number of people through that process. But I thought the most helpful thing I could do is really just to, I'm just surprised that I can work this thing. I've never worked technology before successfully. I thought the best thing I could do for this morning was just really run through just some of the essentials behind our model and some of the benefits that I see. I think we've talked about the cross-sector thing before, but a huge ingredient in that is finding respect. Respect in each of the three sectors for the others. I feel very lucky to be trying to do what I'm doing in Scotland because there's enough of that. There's a reservoir of that. I think also it's been very important to keep it strategic. It's very easy to become an answer to government. It's very easy to become a vehicle and become a delivery. So it's important, we feel, to keep it strategic. The depoliticizing point is that at all costs, avoid politicians. You knew that anyway. I didn't have to say that. But the relationships we have are throughout what would be called here bureaucracy, but we might call them civil servants, and that's where we work. Now, that brings me on to the relationships point. I know it's central to the questions you have, Benedict. That takes time. That takes a huge amount of time because nothing is ever single issue, and you've got to work across various parts of government. The time we invest in relationships is huge in that respect. The next essential is to focus on the added value, and that was covered in the last couple of days. I won't say any more, but it's very easy for people to see venture philanthropy as a cost rather than the added value. Obviously, evidencing leverage and maybe fundamental, and probably the first point rather than the last point, was that building a shared understanding at the outset was vitally important to what we've done. The benefits we see, and these are really thrown up perhaps for questions in time, the benefits we see is it's allowed us to build scale, and that creates efficiency, which has been very helpful. It's given the ventures we work with the ability to have policy impact, and our contracts with government, our various activities with government, that's implicit within those. And I think my point about the prevention challenge, that's probably a Western government point, that we're living in a situation where resources are declining and demographics are driving up demand. So we've got to find ways to create spend that's preventative, that's upstream, that produces future savings both in terms of human cost and financial cost. I think we're an answer to rational resourcing as an industry, an answer to rational resourcing and better decision making. And hugely important to me is that throughout the social sector, anywhere in the world I've seen it, there's life changers. And I think we can liberate those life changers with our support and leverage again. Those are my comments. So I think it is an answer. I don't know that we are the whole answer to government, but I think we can be an answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now, Paul, you worked in the Obama administration with a particular fund, the Social Innovation Fund. In recent years in America, the government has been seen to be the source of social problems as well as the implementer of solutions. How is this changing? How can the government become an enabler and a partner to venture philanthropy through social purpose organizations?
Well, thank you, Benedict, and I'd like to just add to what everyone else has said in terms of congratulations to AVPN and all of you for your participation in this meeting. I think we've really broken new ground here, and these are really crucial issues. The relationship between the work we do and government is a very dynamic question that is playing out in all of our countries. In the United States is a very kind of interesting situation in that if you go back through U.S. history, the tradition in the United States is that people do not rely on government for solving social problems. And that it goes back to the very origins of where who populated the North American continent and created the American society and that sort of thing. And the tradition was people identifying problems and organizing themselves and their communities to attack them. And it was not until actually the 20th century, and especially the middle of the 20th century, that in the United States, that the default social service provider became the federal government and local governments. Now, when that happened, it happened big time, and you've seen expectations of Americans change over time. So it is somewhat different now in terms of expectations, and the role government has played has evolved. But if anything, I think for a variety of factors, some of which I alluded to in my remarks yesterday, we're seeing a momentum build for the government having a much more accommodative point of view toward where innovation can come from. And the government, especially now with the Obama administration, is clearly exhibiting and proactively exhibiting a lot of behavior that is, to use Andrew's word, respectful of the efforts that people like you in the venture philanthropy community in the United States have demonstrated. Again, circumstances are favorable to this. It's not just an educational process. The budget and fiscal constraints in the U.S. are formidable, and the situation is not going to change anytime soon. So there is a sense of growing incentive for the government to be much more thoughtful about how money is spent, on what basis large expenditures are determined, and there is a greater emphasis now being placed on things like innovation and the role of evidence. And I just want to highlight a couple of things. I think if this, thank you. If I can, where's that? My new technology savvy friend here. So what I've listed here are some of the initiatives that just the Obama administration is doing, and just this year. And so this list literally comes from, I asked when the question came up, I went to my friends in the White House, and I said, so like, what do you guys say? And this is what they say. These are the initiatives that the White House is promoting in terms of the proactive activity of the federal government. So I just want to highlight, and we won't go bullet by bullet, but the first has to do with the funding for these innovation funds. So the Obama administration has created funds, and you can see the magnitudes, and they vary, but it adds up to a fairly substantial amount of money for funds that are explicitly charged with finding private sector solutions, nonprofit organizations that are doing good work, whose models are backed by evidence, who have the potential to grow, and investing in them. And that takes place, as you can see, I've noted the department of the government. So there's the Invest in Innovation, which is the Department of Education, the First in the World, which is a new fund, also in innovation. It's got a somewhat different target. The Workforce Innovation Fund is in the Department of Labor. So unlike the education funds are looking for education-related nonprofits, again, that have innovative models, the potential to grow, strong management. I mean, it's venture philanthropy. Similarly, the Workforce Innovation Fund in the Department of Labor is looking to find fresh approaches to job training, financial literacy, and some of these kinds of questions. And then, of course, the Social Innovation Fund that I described yesterday in the Corporation for National and Community Service is intended similarly to begin to stimulate the flow of money to nonprofits that work in low-income communities that, again, have evidence of real impact. And all of this, this is part of a strategy for the government, because the Obama administration in each of these instances is hoping not only that these funds find organizations and grow organizations that can drive impact, they are also hoping that these combined efforts create momentum in the marketplace around greater embracing of innovative models. The second thing is this other tiered evidence initiatives. This goes to increasing funding for different funds throughout the government that may not be like the innovation funds, but are explicitly aimed at funding things that, again, have a strong evidentiary support around the efficacy of their models. The third category, pay for success, we really haven't talked much about pay for success, but we've talked a little bit about it in some of these panels, and that's it's a new way of thinking about how evidence-backed innovations that have the potential for really significant impact might be able to scale based on greater availability of capital from sources that historically have not funded nonprofits. And then the final thing, just other initiatives to improve the availability and use of data. So all of these things are aimed at driving increasing proportions of the federal budget to organizations that actually have evidence of being effective. And while that is true of some government-created and supported initiatives, it is also absolutely true about the government's, acknowledgement of the power of the innovation that's coming out of the nonprofit sector, especially in venture philanthropy, and their willingness to embrace that. All that said, I would like to echo what the other panelists have said about government. I think kind of bottom line, just to summarize, and again, this relates to some of the things that I talked about yesterday that Doug and others have talked about, which is if you look at what we do and you just extrapolate forward, and from the standpoint of what is required for our efforts grounded in the venture philanthropy processes to realize their full potential for social impact, it is, I think, impossible to envision a scenario where that could happen without explicit partnerships with government, okay? That said, we all make our individual decisions. Okay, it's one thing to sit back and say, we look over time at how venture philanthropy is moving the government and that kind of stuff, and serving our societies. But we've got a different situation. We make individual decisions about what we invest in and how we manage the organizations that we're supporting. And I think, to say the least, it is far more complicated from that standpoint, because engaging with government at a practical level has a lot of complications, just as it has some potential rewards.
Thank you. Okay, so the panelists are actually more Asian than I thought they would be. So being that you're being very polite about governments, perhaps I can ask, and by way of kicking off the question and answer session, ask anybody, or more than one if there are among you, to come forward and share about your perspectives about Asian governments, because we've heard perspectives about UK, Canada, and the US. But what about Asian governments? How have your experiences with them been? It's open to the floor right now. We have, just please feel free and go to the microphones out here.
Yeah, it's not really about the Asian government, but related to, I just want to know if...
Sorry, I have to,
yeah.
no, I want to call, sorry, I have to call time on that. I need a perspective from Asian governments to complete this picture first. Yeah, okay, please. Okay. So no, he's trying to do my work, so okay, fine. Go ahead, please.
I just want to understand if we want to start a dialogue on venture philanthropy in developing countries like Nepal or Bangladesh or Pakistan, where traditional form of aid are still prevailing. So what would you suggest? Number A, set up a local chapter of AVPN. Means like investing in advocacy or investing in policy making. I mean, do you think that it's important for developing countries to have some sort of legal framework? Like in UK, you have a very strong legal framework in terms of big society and blah blah blah. So what do you suggest? Do you suggest how we can approach the government, or how can we get the buy-in from the bilateral donors? Because in Asian countries, apart from developed countries, Singapore, Malaysia, Korea, Japan, so there's a big divide between developed and underdeveloped. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that it's not only industrialized countries.
Thanks for the question. Very good question. So how do you get into developing Asian countries? How to get this started? I'm not going to ask them to answer. I would like to see who else would like to comment, follow on this question if possible. If not, then add another comment about Asian governments. Can you come to the microphone so we can, you come to the microphone so we can move quickly. We're going to get this moving. Yesterday, I think there was not much airtime. Today, I want to get the alcohol going. Sorry, Andrew. It's okay. No, but he told me he just came from the bar, so and then now he goes on. Go on.
Good morning, everyone. I am from the Philippines. A bit of insight on an Asian country's government.
Yeah.
We are investors in a countryside in the southern island of Mindanao, and we were confronted. Excuse me. We were confronted with government policies restricting the hectareage of land that could be planted to a certain crop, specifically banana. Then the market was growing, and we were asked by foreign principals to please produce more bananas, and we did go to the government, who caused the roadblock in the first place for good reasons. And the government did reconsider, and we were able to do our project. So I agree that while we make individual decisions as businessmen or entrepreneurs, more so if it is for philanthropic ends, but we do have to engage government. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, my name is James. I'll share my perspective working with the governments of Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. I think first off is that these are developing countries. So the governments they're not going to be sophisticated to have like an evidence-based kind of approach. In fact, they're looking for those models generally through partnerships, through NGOs, whatnot, through like multilateral institutions like the World Bank or ADB and et cetera. So they employ sort of like this output-based approach to try to encourage these type of partners to show evidence in their kind of like subsidies or grants that they give to various institutions. And the other thing I want to comment on is, since I have some experience working with NGOs, a lot of the time when you do a project with the government, you work closely in alignment with them. So you go after an MDG goal, you work with, in terms of the institutional structure with them, so they'll have like a project management unit from, let's say in Vietnam, for example, you've got the central ministry level, and you have the province level, and you've got like the district community level. You got to work along that vertical government hierarchy in tight coordination, right? And so it's very different working in the U.S. At least that's part of my experience as well. Working in the U.S. is very different.
Thank you.
And therefore,
how would you advise our friend over here about how to get it started? To work with governments in emerging economies.
Yeah, basically you get boots on the ground. You network with the NGO scene, probably working with some of those government institutions, whatever ministries there are. And there are going to be conversations there. They'll do solicitations for these things. It's public notice, and then you kind of have to work through that. Issue-based type of initiative, and then align yourselves with whatever technical expertise that's going into those things, whether it's HIV or climate change or something like that.
So please introduce yourself to him during the coffee break, and then we'll get this conversation going. Can I have a comment from that gentleman over there?
Hello. Good morning. I'm Manas Ratha. I work with Dasra in India. The question is, we work with a lot of NGOs, and most of them do work with government, with the bureaucracy. The problem is that you spend a year building your credibility and relationship with a particular person, and then they get moved around a lot, and then you're back to square one with the next person, with their successor, again building credibility. Now we have a lot of thoughts around how government should work so that they don't have this disruption all the time, but from the non-profit organization or from the social impact organization's perspective, any thoughts around, aside from just being patient and sort of keep working at it? Any thoughts or experiences around how to work in these sort of situations where you're constantly spending more time building credibility than actually making headway with how government should operate? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wants to comment on that one? How to manage the relationships when you have people changing jobs, and in government they like to do that in the interest of career development. I don't understand why, but they do that.
It happens in governments all over the world. I think the strategy is you don't just have one point of contact. As the colleague said, you engage at multiple levels across government. Also with that person who's moving on, they usually have to brief the new person coming in. If you have the right relationship, they'll introduce you to them, they'll set the stage. If you're there to be a resource and assist them in their job, or they perceive you're assisting them, they will listen to you, and hopefully you can get engaged quicker than going in as like a fresh start. So make sure you've engaged across at all levels.
I would just add that in a government like the US, where you also have two really distinct political parties, where it can be a very big transition from one to the other of a whole bureaucracy, that it's really important to look down the line and make sure you're cultivating relationships with future potential leaders, regardless of what party they're in, because once there is a change, it's too late to start. You have to have laid the groundwork.
Yeah, I think I recognise the changing issue as well, but I would turn it on its head and see that's an opportunity. People moving on actually broadens your base of influence within government. So that can be, it's disruptive. I'm not saying that what you've said is not a challenge, but it actually broadens that out. Could I just respond slightly to Seema's question in terms of the setup? There is no easy answer to that. And you pointed out quite rightly that a body like AVPN gives a credibility and creates an environment or a system for that, and it's very important. But I think that bringing government in, before you get to actually the ask, bringing them in a policy sense and trying to share policy thinking with them and building a common understanding of a policy area before getting into the answer, I think is hugely important, a shared baseline. We did that for our first few funds, and we used an outside agent to come and do that, but government fed into it, private investors fed into it, foundations fed into it, and we created something that then there was it didn't belong to any one part of it, but everyone had bought into. So I think that's important, and probably also to base it in a social issue. The first fund in a country, base it in a social issue where there's a broad recognition of a market failure.
Paul, you want to add something?
Well, I just wanted to build on what Andrew was mentioning, because one thing I think that's really crucial to keep in mind, and this is touched on or hinted at a couple different times, is that government is different. The motivations are different, kind of from the macro level, but also from the individual level. And especially now where we're talking about creating individual relationships or whatever, it just is absolutely crucial that you think through, anybody who's inclined to get involved in the government, that you think through very carefully how the world looks from their eyes. And so what they're seeking, whether that's a macro question in terms of the department's mission and that sort of thing, or their personal motivation. Because these things, in the end, will be fundamental factors driving both the decision that Simone is getting at, which is like, do they embrace what I'm doing? So it'll affect both the initial decision, so whether they respect what you're doing and buy what you're selling, and also what life is like if you end up working with the government, because it doesn't stop. Once you start working with the government, life is different. So understanding that is really crucial.
Gentleman over there, yes.
Good morning. My name is Azad. I work with the Central Square Foundation in India. We've been around for a year, and we've been trying to engage with the government quite actively over the years. So we have some interesting experiences. But I think the question or the comment and question that I'd like to talk about is the importance of data, and how government is often reluctant to measure itself and also to be transparent with its data. So in India, we have this particular problem where government, I think, focuses more on measuring inputs rather than outcomes. And I know yesterday we were talking a lot about outcomes in the breakout panel upstairs, but I guess maybe if some of you could comment on this issue of how do you move government from measuring inputs to looking at outcomes, and is that a journey that it's possible to take a government along?
Good question. I move on to, we'll come back to that question, yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on your point about how life is different.
And you're from?
I've been based in Beijing for 8 years. And when I went there, my dad said, you're always going to be the bridesmaid in Beijing. I thought, what do you mean? You're not going to get a boyfriend? And then I worked out what he meant. You've always got to be the bag carrier. You've got to be because the stakes are so high for the officials when they work with you. They've got their neck on the block. Or if they're seen with foreigners under the current administration, there's potential for being accused of being involved in corruption. The stakes are really high. So I think you've got to realize what the government is up against when they work with you in China and they engage with you on any level. There's brilliant officials out there, particularly in the junior ranks. It's been my policy. At the beginning, I worked with 3, and I lost quite a lot of money through corruption, personal money. Subsequently, I've only worked with 1. He's excellent. And as life is different, I've only worked out, and I've come to Singapore, that roaming on my phone's only blocked in mainland China. I'd blame my law firm for cutting off my roaming. I realized that, you know, they cut things off from you when you're in China. So life is very different. You know, you're watched at home, everything is watched. But there's no stress for me. I just lose my visa. Those guys lose their neck is on the block constantly. So I think that the thing that I'm constantly concerned about is, what about the official? So when we run an event together, because you need all 3 stakeholders to run an education project, we have the PLA on the stage first, even though our education project takes place at the British school. So we have a PLA singer in army uniform. Then we have the British headmaster doing drums with one of the Chinese army drummers to show a harmonious society in action. Then we have the corporate sponsors. So it's government first, harmonious society 2, and then number 3, your money. But the one thing that I mean, it's been a really painful process, but what I've really learned from listening to his phone calls is, I might lose my job or my visa, he loses his freedom. So, you know, the guys who will risk working with us, they're the real pioneers, and we have to be the bridesmaids. So that's all I've seen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You brought up 2 points that I thought nobody else would bring up, but, you know, the issue of face, you know, and the big C word, which I'm not allowed to talk about. You know, Singapore, we're not allowed to talk about the big C word because we are a small country in a big region. Those of you who don't understand Singapore humor, it's okay. You just watch your colleagues laughing and you just laugh with them. It's all right. Don't worry. After that, come and see me and I'll explain the wry humor that we have. I think it was you, right? Okay, you. Sorry, there was one question we wanted to know, how the guy from India, right? There was a question that you asked, data. Okay, remember that question about data. You know, okay, go on.
Hi, I'm Anu, and I'm with the Shell Foundation based out of India. We've been doing a lot of work with governments at various levels, because while we create pioneering enterprises, we do realize that for us to go to scale without government involvement and without creating an ecosystem and an enabling environment, we can't work. So at various levels, we work with various levels of success, or I would say challenges. At some of our mobility work, where we work with government at the center, so there's 2 levels of government, center and state, and India being the huge country that it is, even within the state, you go down to various districts and work with, you know, district authorities, which is like, you know, 2,000 villages in a district. So it's large enough for you to make impact if you can even work in a single district. But at the center, what we've seen is, when we work on our mobility work, we primarily work with influencing policy. So we get research papers done out of our partners, they present white papers across to be able to influence the government's, you know, urban mobility policy going forward, the investments across various paratransit, mass rapid transport, etc. But those are very policy paper-driven pieces of work. On our non-conventional renewable energy work, we work with governments primarily pushing through the fact that subsidization of low-cost energy products, which is what government has historically done, is given away cook stoves, for example. We've kind of pushed that as a process to say, what is important? Why is a market-based approach important? Why is subsidy not a way forward in terms of sustainability and long-term? And what could be those hooks? And we've seen a lot of engagement that's happened at various stages in terms of them being open to look at carbon finance and looking at catalyzing.
So can I just, what is the one factor that allows for government officials to engage with you, or you see the plus factor about all your engagements?
I think it's just long-term relationship building with individuals, and you do at times come back frustrated, very, very often, but I think it is about stakeholder management. It is just about stakeholder management. And on the ground, what we see is, just closing out, give me a minute more. On the ground, we've worked with health workers. So we see that in our cook stoves piece of work that we do on the ground, there's no amount of social awareness investments we can do as an organization to make a difference to a country as huge as ours. So we've taken permission from the Rural Development Ministry and trained their health workers, which are called Anganwadis in rural India, and worked with about a few villages. We trained a few hundreds of them. And they basically go anyways door to door talking to women and children. So they work to also support our social awareness.
So there's an engagement at the officials level and engagement at the grassroots level?
Yes, absolutely. So we engage with the officials to get their permissions and get the state ministry to sign off and said we are okay. And then we had to go and train the local health workers on the ground to be able to take it forward.
Thank you for your contribution.
So
Thank
replication is a big importance in all of that.
Thank you. Moving on. Sorry, I'm looking at the time. Just want to get more people to
keeping it brisk.
Share. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Joanne. I'm from the Philippines. I mean, I guess just a quick comment on what you were saying. Best to engage with, was it bureaucrats and not politicians? But in my country, I find that a lot of the power is concentrated with the politicians. And as politicians get voted into power, they bring in their own teams, and the bureaucrats of old may then get tossed out in exchange for this new posse, etc. So, just your thoughts on how to deal with that.
Okay. Are there any politicians or officials in the audience? If you don't want to come to the microphone, you could go to the booth behind and we'll bring a microphone to you so nobody can see your face. Anybody? We have? Okay, come please. To be fair, we need to get a response from government as well, and politicians and bureaucrats, officials. Yes. Lady over there, yeah. Yeah, you.
Hi, I'm Cindy Jin from South Korea. I want to I would love to hear your opinion, because Asian economy development was government driven, and we were able to grow very fast, and there are pros and cons. And I cannot fail to witness that Asian government is approaching similarly to social sector. So what I would love to hear from you is at what developmental stage should government engage at what capacity? I ask this question because in the States and in Europe, it seems like private sector and grassroots started the social sector at a more developed stage. Government got involved heavily. So I want to know if it's appropriate or it's right for government to engage in social sector at such early stage and have really be the driver.
Okay, thank you. We have a response.
No, I'm not responding. I'm very much... I'm here to learn. But what perhaps I can do is to share what life looks like inside government. I work with the Hong Kong government. I run a little thing called the Efficiency Unit. Not until 5-6 months ago, we had nothing to do with social innovation. We were purely an internal business process reform organization. But the politicians, I said, we need, as a government, to be moving into this field. First of all, we need to learn how. Because government programs, once they get running, are like super tankers. They're very difficult to change. So unless you get them started in the right direction to begin with, you can cause a lot of havoc. One of the things we see is, at the moment, sort of in our administration, a lot of money is going into what have been defined in Hong Kong as social enterprises. But really, there's not really much entrepreneurial side there. And even the sector itself has been saying, actually, we need to start breaking free of the constrictions of government funding because of all the regulation around it, and get greater diversity of funding and activity. So I'm in the odd position of having to decide how a new government fund is going to be used, but in a way that isn't going to replicate what's been done in the past, which is why I'm here trying to understand how you think. So just to share a few things about how government works. I mean, yes, we do move people around quite a bit. Quite often that's because of corruption prevention measures. It's also trying to raise awareness. And I think the point about there is benefit from people moving around, because once you've made a personal contact, Okay, they move on to a different job, but they're still there in government, they're a point of contact. They might come back to that area. And similarly, within government, we see the advantage of that network building up. Strengthening networks between the government and the community, but also networks within the government so that an idea gets more roots is important. But, again, governments are siloed organisations. I mean, some of the efficiency improvements come from greater and greater specialisation. So if you talk to the wrong person, I mean, if, certainly in Hong Kong, you come and talk to the person who's responsible for putting out grants to existing social enterprises about the kind of things you're trying to do, they'll smile at you, but really they're not interested. It's not their job to do that. So you have to think carefully, who is the right person to go to? And sometimes in this area, there aren't many people. And we also, within government, have to think about how do we build up our capacity to engage effectively with the kind of community that you are. And we need to bring in different skills and learn as well. So if you don't engage, we don't understand what's needed. So fundamental message, I'd echo what the panel is saying. Do engage. We're not frightening beasts.
Thank you. Thank you. I gave you more airtime because you're a lone voice in this audience. But thank you for those insights. I think very helpful. I'm going to, last two questions, and I'll bring back to the panel. We have to address the issue of how governments can be more transparent in data, and the other issue about politicians versus bureaucrats. But meanwhile, let's take two more comments and then move on. Okay, yes, the gentleman over there.
So I want to do the response.
Yeah, want to do the reverse.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
My name is Tao Zi. I'm from China Foundation Center. Our office is located in Beijing. And I'm also the friend of Claire. We work together. So I want to do some response about the Chinese government related philanthropy. Actually, China is becoming more and more open to the civil society, especially in our the new government. Maybe most of you about China is we don't open to the NGO, but actually it's changing. 2 weeks ago, we visited the central government. They told us from the beginning of next year, it's open for the registration of Chinese NGO. So that's the current change. The second one is in China, the culture is not kind of, we don't respect the blame culture. We respect the constructive suggestion. So for example, if you can keep saying you are bad, but that's nothing happened, the government will don't like you at all. But if you show the evidence, the solution, a very successful solution, then the government can take a very quick action to do the response. So for example, in 3 years ago, the China Foundation Center was established. In 3 years ago, only right now we have 3,000 Chinese foundations registered. And 3 years ago, only 16 of them are transparent, show their financial reports. But right now, we have 90% Chinese foundation. They publish their financial report and their project information, how they spend their money. The reason we make this change by China Foundation Center is because we're working together with these foundations and to persuade and to talk with the government officer who manage those information. 3 years ago, only 3 Chinese government disclosed the financial reports they managed. But right now, we have another 12. So in total, it's 15 Chinese government office disclose the information about the managed, including some financial information and the charity information. So the reason is that we tell the public, tell the foundation, tell the government how to do that. We offer them the technical solution. We offer them some very strategic internet technology. So then they can take it and realize the transparency is the strength, the future strength. We should do that. So I can say in the future, please feel free to come to us and to witness the changing of the Chinese philanthropy sector. And also, Claire, if you meet any challenge, you can come to us too. Maybe you didn't find the right person. So thank you.
Thank you. Will you pay for my airfare to Beijing? Yeah, you guys should have a conversation with him because the Foundation Center in China, it's a tremendous growth organization. They've done so much in such a short span of time. Yes, one comment, and then we'll come back to the panel.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Shariha from Scope Group Malaysia. I was requested by one of the panelists not to ask a difficult question today, so I promise I won't do that. But if I may, I want to begin with a comment because Scope, we've done a lot of work with governments in this region as well as South Asia in some very difficult issues, i.e. drug addiction management and HIV/AIDS. Now, if we want to be able to actually create change, what we have learned over the years, we're still learning, of course, we've not gotten the formula right, is that you've really got to work with as many stakeholders as possible. You've got to engage them with their counterparts who are progressing somewhere else in the world, doing something and getting successes. You've got to be patient. You've got to involve the multilateral agencies, especially those that they look up to. That becomes important to them. You've got to very quickly show results of anything that you're going to do. And you've got to make them feel like they are the change makers. You've got to give them the credit.
Face.
But I think specific to this conference, because that took about 3 to 5 years to change policy. And I don't think, the social issues that exist can wait 3 to 5 years, really. So my question to the panel is, what area should we exactly engage government in? Because if we're going to engage them at the level of policy change, it will take time, whereas the problems can't wait. So, and also, is there any role for government investment arms? Temasek, Khazanah in Malaysia.
Why drag me into this?
I thought it might be fair that you also answer being part of a government investment arm. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to ask my esteemed colleagues here. We have a question on transparency of data. We have a question on should government work at the grassroots and be the driver for community and social services. And then we have a question about engagements. We can't wait for policy. Let's get down to it and start to address some of the issues. You don't have to answer all of them, but just perhaps cover as much as possible before we conclude. And you could also do your summary remarks as well. Thank you.
So I will try to pull together a couple of these and 3 quick comments. One is that NGOs and philanthropists have been influencing government policy for many, many years, decades. What we're talking about here is not just substantive policy influence, but really injecting a whole new policy framework into government that focuses on innovation and entrepreneurship. And so it's, in this case, not just about saying, fund this kind of program and not that, so much as here's a whole new way of thinking about what government funding should look like. For that reason, I would say it doesn't just happen. And so that means you have to engage with politicians. So while ultimately being able to work effectively with bureaucracies, with the people who design the regulations matter, you also do have to work with politicians because they're the ones who can legitimize a new framework for thinking about the role of government and create a mandate that then agencies or departments need to follow. So I think to have an influence that goes beyond a very narrow scope of policy, you do actually have to engage politically. And in the US, that means not just in getting the policies created in the first place, but actually in getting them funded, which is a whole second level of effort, and that goes on and on. It's not a one-time thing, but an annual appropriation cycle for many things that we're talking about. So the last thing I'd say is that it is an unusual opportunity for people in this room to think differently about the role of venture philanthropy, not just as a funder, but actually as a creator of coalitions that can drive this policy framework, which is something that probably wasn't obvious from the outset in the US when venture philanthropy emerged, but has become incredibly important. The the social entrepreneurs who really are at the heart of a lot of what the social innovation policy looks like in the US have been organized and enabled by venture philanthropy to create these policy agendas, to advocate for them, to go and show government what results can look like, to be part of an ongoing dialogue about what government can do to create incentives for the kind of data-driven policies that will actually solve social problems faster and more effectively.
Anybody else?
Thank you. It's been really interesting. The questions have been fantastic. I think I've learned more from the questions than I've imparted. I'm not sure that's the order of things it's meant to be, but remarkable insights, so thank you for those. I'd like to try and go through quite a number of them, but very quickly. On the data question that came from top left, I think there's a sell to be made to government on better data and better understanding of metrics. That government make decisions, they make tough decisions, they fund, they defund, and they don't always have the data to underpin those decisions, and end up sometimes in quite difficult situations in the media and so on and so forth. So I think there's a sell to be made. I think you accept where you are, you accept where things are, but I think there's a positive sell to be made on a better understanding of the logic model behind social interventions and the evidence coming out of them. I think there's been a few comments about frustration with government. That's a very brave intervention from Hong Kong, but we look at the quantum of the money. In our first fund, we've had £20 million from government into that fund, almost matched pound for pound with private money from a range of sources. The frustration and the time that we've invested, or the time we've invested in government in that relationship, has been very well spent against some of the private, smaller donations we've received, our investments we've received. So measure up the quantum with the time that's spent and try and put that in context. Yeah, the ultimate sign-off is politicians to pick up, but I think that I stand by the thing about bureaucrats inform politicians. I recognise the comment there. The final comment, and I don't mean to be confrontational, but I think there's a lot of perception of what government is like rather than reality of what government is like. And that certainly was the way it was for me setting up Inspiring Scotland with some of the people who were sitting around about me. They told me government was slow, they told me government was bureaucratic, they told me government was never going to be fleet of foot or entrepreneurial. I can assure you that government have been more entrepreneurial than many of the private sector investors in our first fund.
I'd like to build on this data question too. And first of all, I'd agree with Kim's key point that you really have to focus on the politicians because they are the leaders. And the bureaucracy is almost by definition driven by inertia. So in general, and I'm sure Andrew can give us some examples of the innovativeness that he has in mind. That isn't what comes to my mind when I think about my own engagement with the bureaucracy, but that notwithstanding, Andrew's point about having to make the sale is crucial because this is new. Now, all that said, I think for us, we've got to be single-mindedly focused on data. Okay, yes, we have to make the sale. Yes, we have to make the sale to the politicians. But you can't make the sale unless you've got something to sell. And the key to our success is data. It can't, because we're not going to win on any other basis. We can't win on persuasion. We can't win on compelling stories. We can't win on political muscle because any of those dimensions were outflanked by somebody else. The key to our success is going to be our ability to deliver interventions that actually can be proven to be better than the status quo. And it is an uphill battle, and I'll refer to one of the two examples that I showed yesterday morning. Both of those are excellent examples of data-driven, validated interventions that have compelling advantages. And this Youth Villages, I mean, it's twice the benefit at 1/3 the cost. And Youth Villages has been able to establish itself with only 11 of 50 states. Now, why is that? Okay, well, there are reasons. There are reasons for that. But I can assure you of this. So on one hand, you can look at that and you go like, gosh, that's really frustrating, da-da-da-da-da. But you look at that another way, if youth villages did not have a compelling value proposition like that, then there's zero reason why any of us should even care. So it's got to be about performance.
Thank you.
I know we have to wrap up, so I'll be short. I think the reality is we have to develop a strategy for government. And when you do that, you can't do it just based on your organization. You have to do it as a sector to drive change and to get the government engaged in doing things differently. So it's not just about your organization receiving money, it's about doing business differently with government. So you have to work together and collaborate. You also have to start looking at your partners, who's the best person to, or group to influence government. Others could go in and have a different conversation in government than you can. And especially at the political level, I believe you do have to engage with the politicians, but you also have to realize that they could be gone in a year, 2 years, or 3 years. So you also have to make sure you're engaging with the opposition at all times as well, because you don't want it to just be a flavor of the month or the year until the next election and it gets thrown out. So you've got to be really strategic in how you engage government. You have to look long term, and I know it's frustrating. And the other part too is you need to make sure as you go along you do save face for them. And especially for the bureaucrats, you know, a lot of them want to color outside the lines and they're not allowed to. Partnering with you may allow them to do things differently. So really empower, save face, and be very strategic and put the time and effort in. It's not going to happen overnight, but you can get great results. And as Andrew said, you know, the reward at the end financially can be a lot bigger than some of the other deals that you do with private sector or foundations. So it's worth putting the time in.
Thank you. Many of the things that you've shared today actually resonate with me in my work in Temasek Foundation. What we do is we support capacity building programs, content and expert institutions, transferring their knowledge, their skills to corresponding institutions in the Asian communities. And we work with governments a lot. We negotiate, we see whether they blink when we talk to them, and we have lots of relationship building efforts. If there was one thing I could take away from all of today's discussion is I think we need to have more drinks with government, government officials. Just coming, hold on. So thank you for all your participation. Do you realize that today there were just not 4 panelists here, but perhaps 200 co-panelists, and that's all of you here. So thank you for your participation as well. And thank you to our 4 esteemed panelists here. And I will end in an Asian way as well with an apology. And the apology is this: if there was anything that any one of us said here that offended any one of you, we're sorry, just for the moment. And come and see me later. And you know, we really apologize, and we hope that it is all said in the spirit of learning and benefiting from each other's experiences. Thank you very much.